Forget the whispers about Ferrari's secret engine tricks. That's child's play. The real story? It exploded the moment Lewis Hamilton gripped a Ferrari steering wheel for the very first time. He didn't stroll in politely, nodding at the team. No. Within minutes, he dropped a line that shook Maranello to its foundations. "What the hell is this power steering?" This wasn't a minor complaint. It was a full-scale detonation aimed at the heart of Ferrari's design philosophy. A direct challenge from one of the most decorated drivers in history. And the fallout from those 5 words? It's tearing open years of political comfort, technical compromise, and unspoken truths inside the Scuderia. Hamilton didn't mumble his way into Ferrari's world. He stormed it. The remark about the steering wasn't about grip alone, it was a cultural shockwave. A message from a driver who'd earned the right to question everything in that garage. When he asked, "What the hell is this?" He wasn't talking about a defective component. He was calling out an entire mindset. Tomorrow, we'll reveal exactly who inside that garage pushed back, who caved, and who's now trying to drag Ferrari out of the swamp of its own politics. Because they thought Hamilton would be the smiling newcomer, pose for photos, wave to the tifosi, quietly learn to live with their quirks. Instead, he took the car out at Fiorano, made it through just 3 corners, and unveiled 6 years of compromise in one instinctive moment. The problem? The steering didn't communicate. It didn't respond. It didn't talk back. In that dead zone, fine movements were lost, accuracy was dulled, and no one, not even Leclerc, had dared put it into words. Why? Because Ferrari hadn't been building cars for drivers. They'd been building cars to avoid conflict. Safe, inoffensive machines, shaped by committee, designed to satisfy everyone and ultimately serve no one. Hamilton didn't just detect the flaw, he went after the ideology behind it. "I want the wheel to feel like it's part of my hand," he declared. That wasn't a polite suggestion, it was a non-negotiable. And that ultimatum landed on the desk of a man most tifosi had never heard of, Riccardo Adami. Adami's role was never to start revolutions. He was there to refine, to smooth the edges, to keep the peace. But when Hamilton threw down the challenge, Adami picked it up. You want a direct, linear response? Then that's what you'll get. And so, without announcements, without headlines, Ferrari began quietly dividing its engineering soul in 2. One steering system for Leclerc, soft, forgiving, with deliberate delay. Another for Hamilton, immediate, raw, and brutally responsive. The results spoke for themselves. In simulator sessions at Mugello, Hamilton's input traces were pristine. Minimal corrections, surgical precision. Leclerc's looked noisy, like static on a radio. When the data hit the screens, the engineers didn't just see numbers, they saw a philosophy crumbling. The question was no longer about mechanics, it was about identity. Which driver's feel would become the Ferrari standard? Team boss Fred Vasseur said nothing. He simply studied 2 overlaid telemetry lines, Leclerc's jittery, hesitant. Hamilton's sharp, composed, deliberate. It was more than feedback, it was a mirror. And it showed that Ferrari's so-called neutral steering wasn't neutral at all. It was softened, watered down, politically safe, technically compromised. The decision, we'll run it in FP1. Just one sentence, but inside Ferrari, it landed like a seismic wave. Acknowledging Hamilton's approach meant more than new hardware. It meant admitting the last 5 years had been built on accommodation rather than ambition. At Spa, that first practice run wasn't just another Friday shakedown. It was a silent verdict on a Ferrari's old self. The car with Hamilton's steering felt quicker, sharper, more alive. Engineers whispered about cleaner mid-corner balance and reduced aero disturbances. And in the middle of it all, Leclerc's presence began to shift. He didn't voice complaints, that's not his style, but those who knew him noticed the signs: clenched jaw, shorter debriefs, more hours in the simulator. He wasn't being replaced. But suddenly, he wasn't the reference point anymore. Ferrari had spent years framing him as the cornerstone of their future. Now they were quietly reshaping that future around another man's instincts. Officially, it was just a different system. Unofficially, it was the first time in years Ferrari was willing to build for one driver. And that driver was Lewis Hamilton. In Formula One, different usually means one thing: someone in the room gave way. And when Ferrari's steering was rebuilt for Hamilton, another thought began to circulate quietly among the engineers. If he can alter this, what will he alter next? Those early laps on the revised system didn't make the news. No podium celebrations, no championship points. But deep in the simulator rooms, people were paying attention. Hamilton's laps were steady, the car's exits more precise, his corrections minimal. One engineer, half under his breath, remarked, "It doesn't feel like a Ferrari anymore." But that wasn't a dig, it was admiration. What he really meant was, "This feels like a car that wins." And then history started to echo. In hushed conversations, names surfaced. Todt, Brawn, Schumacher. Not because Hamilton is Schumacher, but because Ferrari has only once before allowed itself to be shaped so completely by a driver's hands. Like Michael back then, Lewis wasn't adapting to the car. The car was adapting to him. One demand, one system, one unmistakable message: Ferrari will no longer water things down. And there's a fuse hidden in the fine print of Hamilton's deal. If the steering stayed flawed, if it failed to become an extension of him, he could walk, not to a rival team, but away from the whole project. He spotted the flaw in 3 corners, one mechanic recalled. Imagine what he could expose in 3 months. That's why nobody flinched when his race engineer changed. Why simulator schedules shifted. Why slowly 2 distinct setups became one, his. Because if Hamilton were to leave, it wouldn't just be a transfer out of Maranello. It would be a detonation of the Scuderia's control, ripping apart the idea that the system dictates the car rather than the driver. This time, the system bent. And with both Ferraris now expected to run Hamilton settings, the message is unmistakable. The team's future now carries a signature that isn't Italian. Outwardly, they frame it as a calibration, a refinement, a necessary tweak. But inside the paddock, everyone knows. Ferrari blinked and Hamilton did not. The dead zone is gone. The damping cut back. For the first time in years, the steering moves with urgency, with life. But don't mistake that for closure. This is revelation. And the real verdict will be written in sector times and apex speeds. If it works, Ferrari proves it can still evolve. If it fails, the unity cracks apart again. And this time, it may not recover. As one engineer put it, this isn't a preference, it's performance. And if that's true, Hamilton hasn't just joined Ferrari, he's rewritten its DNA. But until lights out, until the laps are counted, there's a question hanging over Fiorano like a low fog. Did Ferrari rescue itself, or did it simply hand Lewis the trigger? They told him to adapt, to respect the hierarchy, to trust the system. But Lewis Hamilton didn't come to conform. He came to uncover. And what he found in those first 3 corners forced Ferrari to face itself. No more softened feedback, no more engineered safety nets. His steering is razor sharp, reactive, alive. And when the numbers came in, there was no hiding from them. Fred Vasseur relented. The garage split. Leclerc adjusted. Now both cars are tuned to Hamilton's feel, but under the surface, this alignment is more than an engineering choice. It's a shift in power. Ferrari can call it an update if they want. Those who've been around long enough see it for what it is, a move from data to dominance. Because the second Ferrari agreed to his terms, they handed him more than a steering rack. They handed him influence. And influence in Maranello doesn't stop with hardware. Next could be strategy, politics, the entire development roadmap. If the pace improves, Ferrari will have made its most significant transformation in a decade without a press release. But if it doesn't, then the man they've just elevated might be holding the detonator that blows it all apart.